Single out salute, greetings. I'm a hip hop transhumanist. Uh, this is the Singularity Institute. I am Lord Maitreya. My guest today is David Pearce. He is a transhumanist from the UK, co-founder of the World Transhumanist Association, currently going by the name Humanity Plus. Please subscribe, like, share, and hit the notification button. David Pearce's argument is that we have a moral obligation to end all suffering in sentient beings. Ending suffering seems like a goal of Buddhism. What's the difference between what you're saying to end suffering and what the Buddhists are saying? Mr. David Pitts, welcome to the to Singularity Institute. By the way, I'm super excited to have you. You're like my favorite transhumanist.
Well, try one. It's very good to be with you. Yeah, essentially, what I would argue and what transhumanists are committed to is, amongst other things, the Buddhist vision of a world without suffering. Buddha said, I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. He also said, may all that have life be delivered from suffering. But of course, Buddha couldn't anticipate biotechnology.
Right.
And what is distinctive about the transhumanist approach is the way that we urge the use of genetic engineering and information technology to recalibrate the hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill is the set of negative feedback mechanisms in the brain that stop most of us being very happy or very sad for long. Imagine if you just imagine a kind of dial setting, if you could raise or lower the kind of set point of your emotional thermostat, i.e. not engineer a world of constant uniform bliss, but life based on intelligent, information-sensitive gradients of well-being. And this is actually technically possible if we're prepared to edit our genetic source code, DNA. It's obviously extremely ambitious, but if Gautama Buddha were alive today, I don't think he'd say, hey, transhumanists, you ought to be adopting the Noble Eightfold Path.
Right.
Gautama Buddha seems to have been the ultimate pragmatist. If it works, do it. And now, for example, the traditional way to have kids, it's a kind of genetic crapshoot. Two people get together, have sex, a baby is produced, and it's a unique genetic experiment. Whereas now, in principle at any rate, it is possible to use pre-implantation genetic screening, counseling, and soon genome editing to actually choose everything from the level of pain sensitivity of your offspring to hedonic set point to all kinds of other attributes too. Now, if any of your listeners are thinking, hey, I can think of a lot of things that could go wrong, well, they're absolutely right. But yeah, for the first time in history now, we can actually see a technical way forward if we want to phase out the biology of involuntary suffering.
Oh, interesting. I actually started out as a Buddhist also, so I'm quite familiar with the philosophy of Buddhism, even though there's a couple of different schools of thought. But my question to you is, in the hip hop community, anything that tampers with nature, people get afraid of, right? What what do you say to the people that say that nature doesn't need to be to be tinkered with, and that nature needs to be left alone, and that we don't need to get involved with playing around with nature? What do you say to that type of idea?
Yeah, it's a very powerful intuition that what is natural is good, and that humans, essentially, we screw things up. But in response, I would say that, yeah, we are already interfering with nature in countless ways. So the real question to ask is what principles, if any, should guide our interventions? Because after all kinds of aspects, really nasty things like malaria, for example, or sickle cell disease, are completely natural, but they cause a vast amount of suffering. Also, if one looks around, one is wearing clothes. This discussion is critically dependent on digital technology. Does one would you or I want to, live on the African savannah and be threatened by predators, disease, not have enough to eat, all the kind of stuff that's natural? No, essentially, we need to civilize ourselves, and this obviously is rather long term, go on to civilize the rest of nature. It's once again, it's incredibly ambitious. It's not a 5-year plan, but it's technically feasible.
I don't know. How will we? I've seen another thing that you think that we should redesign the ecosystem globally. How would scientists go about ending suffering in the animal kingdom? Like what's some of the steps they would be that would scientists take in doing that?
Well, I'm going to say first, if you'll forgive me for coming to your question second, is that before we can even consider civilizing the rest of nature, we're going to have to stop harming non-human animals in factory farms and slaughterhouses. And realistically, this is going to come about via all the new meat substitutes, but also cultured meat. To go on to your question, once we have essentially shut, closed, outlawed factory farms, slaughterhouses, the whole apparatus of industrialized animal abuse, we can then go on to civilize the rest of nature. How will we do it? Critical is going to be fertility regulation. For something like a large terrestrial vertebrate like an elephant, you can do it with something like immunocontraception, fertility regulation, to stop a kind of uncontrolled population explosion. But also we have to think about the role of today's obligate predators, carnivores. Now, personally, I wouldn't be sad if the world didn't have any snakes and lions and tigers. But most people, they very much want to conserve a world that does have at least some lions and tigers. But it's actually going to be possible to genetically tweak a lion so that the lion doesn't actually harm the zebra or gazelle. I mean, you might perhaps, recall the Bible, this vision of Isaiah where the lion and the wolf can lie down with the lamb. This is actually going to be possible with biotech. I suspect, once again, I suspect a lot of your listeners will be thinking, hey, this is fanciful. But being, asphyxiated or disemboweled or eaten alive is absolutely frightful, whether you're a human or a zebra. So, in the long run, we have to think, what kind of ecosystem, what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a traditional world, red in tooth and claw, with all kinds of appalling suffering, starvation? Or do we want to live in essentially a civilized, compassionate biosphere? A kind of pan-species welfare state, you might say.
And you're a vegan, right?
Yes. I'm a third-generation vegetarian.
Really?
My veganism is much more recent. It is very straightforward to become a vegetarian. Being a strict vegan is much harder. But yes, it's been very encouraging the growth of veganism in the modern era, because I think our aim should really be to be helping sentient beings rather than harming them.
I definitely share those values. So you've been a vegetarian all your life, vegan most of your life?
Yeah, I've never tasted meat. This is, of course,
What?
just an accident of birth.
Wow. Incredible. Um, wow. Um, okay. Let me see. Oh, how long have you been a transhumanist? What even got you in start? I should have started there. What got you into transhumanism? These are not in sequential. These questions are not in sequential order, by the way.
It's that's fine. I
Okay.
mean, I can. As a small child, I read The Prospect of Immortality by Robert Ettinger, and when I realized it was unlikely that I was going to be able to find a cure for the aging process, which I resolved to do age 5 or 6, I
Wow.
was very sold on the idea that we could use cryonics. But my main focus has almost always been the problem of suffering. And yeah,
Mm,
back in 1995, I wrote this online manifesto, The Hedonistic Imperative, which
right.
essentially outlined the vision that I've set uh, out to you.
Mm,
And yeah, I mean, for the benefit of any of your listeners who aren't familiar, I mean, what is transhumanism?
right.
Very, very simplistically, I identify transhumanism with the three supers: super happiness, super longevity, and super
Love
intelligence.
this.
And yeah, different transhumanists will place different weight on
Right.
one or the other of the three supers. And you can argue, for example, that if we're on the brink of post-human and super intelligence, that would solve all our other problems.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a kind of little mnemonic to remind oneself what are the core ingredients of transhumanism. Yeah, super
How,
happiness, super longevity, and
exactly.
super intelligence. Yeah.
How do we achieve? What's some of the technologies and the sciences that would go into uh super happiness?
Um, in the case of super happiness, recall we were talking earlier about the nature of the hedonic treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that this extraordinary, this is very counterintuitive. That 6 months after having a terrible accident, in which you become paralyzed, or winning the national lottery, most
Mm-hmm.
people will, on average, revert to their level of well-being or ill-being before the tragedy or lottery win. Um, and now molecular genetics is starting to tease out this kind of biological genetic basis of the hedonic treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and everything from a newly discovered receptor in the brain that seems to regulate our level of endogenous opioids,
Mm,
to the COMT gene, catecholone methyltransferase. Two variants, one gives you a high, one gives you a low
right.
hedonic set point, to something like the far and far out genes which regulate pain sensitivity and anxiety. Um, yeah, I mean, we're thinking about, well, we've got to consider the different timescales, but via a combination of pharmacology and genetic engineering, we're going to be able to ratchet up hedonic range and hedonic set points.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and whereas you or I would be delighted if in later life we simply enjoy information sensitive gradients of well-being, I
Mm-hmm.
suspect our great grandchildren and beyond them perhaps post-humans will enjoy gradients of superhuman bliss.
Do
Um,
do designer babies perhaps
Yeah, and
phasing out the
this is
genes
it. It is
also?
much easier, in a sense, rather than trying to tweak the genomes of existing people, which is going to be feasible. It's much easier if one chooses the genetic makeup of
Right.
your future children, and the
Right.
cost of getting your genome sequenced or pre-implantation genetic screening and counseling has collapsed. I mean,
Mm.
intuitively, this is a worry I think a lot of people have, that transhumanist technologies are just going to be for the rich and powerful and elite, What about the underprivileged?
Mm.
But anything that can be digitized, any information-based technology, the price trends inexorably to zero, and it's extremely cost effective. I
Mm.
think the big barrier is going to be essentially overcoming status quo bias, because most people just think, well, people have always just had babies, inverted commas, naturally, this kind of traditional genetic crapshoot. But I would argue the responsible thing to do in future is going to be to choose the pain sensitivity
That's
and
right.
approximate hedonic set point of your future kid.
Yeah, why leave it up to Butterfinger nature? I agree. um, I mean, is this possible today? Is designer babies possible today?
Yeah, I mean, the first designer babies were conceived in rather unfortunate circumstances in China,
Yeah.
and it was a complete mess. And though
Mm.
the nominal purpose of the little experiment was to protect against HIV, in fact,
Yes.
the mutation in question, at least in so-called animal models, boost cognition and cognitive performance. So the rogue scientist in question was almost certainly trying to create ultra smart babies, which will be possible, but this shouldn't be done in an underhand way.
Right.
But you ask what can be done right now, and here's an example. Something like the SCN9A gene is a kind of volume knob for pain. Nonsense mutations completely abolish pain, but unfortunately they also mean that, they also abolish nociception, the functional aspect of pain. And for now, at least, for the foreseeable future, it's really important to keep the functional role of pain. But the SCN9A gene has dozens of different variants that confer either unusually high or low pain sensitivity. And imagine if all our future kids could have the pain tolerance of today's, let's say, most fortunate 0.1% of people. If you've ever met someone who says something like, pain is just a useful signaling mechanism, they exist, i.e.,
Right.
they still respond functionally and adaptively to noxious stimuli, but it's not, it doesn't dominate their lives in the way that tragically for some people pain does today. And so before getting rid of physical pain entirely, it makes sense, I would argue, for responsible parents to make sure that their kid has an extremely high pain threshold. And that's an example. I mean, hedonic set point, it's more complicated. There are a whole bunch of genes involved. There needs to be systematic research. There are all kinds of pitfalls. But essentially, this is back to what we were touching on just a few minutes ago. All kids born today are unique, untested genetic experiments. And if you think it's ethically justifiable to bring new life into the world with the potential for suffering, I think you have an obligation to try to load the genetic dice in favor of your future kids. Now, in the case of something like the gene for sickle cell disease, or cystic fibrosis, I think a lot of people are probably quite comfortable with the idea. Where it becomes much more controversial is when parents are starting to choose genes, allelic variations for such things as intelligence, or indeed mood enrichments. There are countless dilemmas that lie ahead. But as we know, life is messy. Life has lots of moral dilemmas.
I mean, I think that we can phase out pain and still be able to know when something is wrong. We don't need pain as a. We don't need pain as a. We don't need to constantly have pain to how we can figure out how to know when something's wrong in the body without having to have the pain. I think, right? Am I right or wrong? Like,
Yeah, essentially, we need to make the transition to a more civilized signaling system. I mean, our silicon robots can do fine avoiding noxious stimuli without the nasty raw feels of pain.
mm-hmm.
And in the long run, we want to go the same way. But
Right.
before, of course, we can completely get rid of the nasty raw feels of pain, we've got to make sure that we can faithfully replicate its functional role.
Right. Exactly. I agree totally. So uh so designer drugs can help with that, perhaps?
Yes.
Pharmacology?
Obviously, one needs to tread extremely carefully here, in that most of today's street drugs are pretty useless because, as we know, what they do is, yeah, they make people feel good, but then what they do is the negative feedback mechanisms of the brain, they kick in, and yeah, they make people feel rotten the next day. Or alternatively, like the opioids, they induce tolerance, dependence, antisocial behavior. So, yeah, there will be a role for sophisticated designer drugs in future. But yeah, we need to be aware of all the pitfalls. I mean, a good designer drug. I mean, think of coffee, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, I love coffee.
Coffee, essentially, yeah, you very carefully calibrate. I'm assuming you're a coffee drinker. I am. Not everyone is. The brain very carefully calibrates how much coffee it wants, how much caffeine in the system. But imagine if a drug that induced far more magical, wonderful states than coffee similarly had this kind of relatively narrow therapeutic window, so that yeah, you chose carefully what is the optimum level. But yeah, I'm still nonetheless very cautious when it comes to designer drugs because yeah, the history of psychopharmacology, it's littered with false
Yeah.
dawns, wonder drugs, and so forth.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yes.
yeah, one
Totally
needs to
agree.
be considering all the possible ways things can go wrong.
Um Now let me backtrack a little bit. So essentially, as a transhumanist, we believe that most of our problems, if not all our problems, stem from our biological engineering problems. So, is it safe to say that in your philosophy, in the hedonistic philosophy, that you don't think that social economics or progress in politics and technology will help us be able to solve the problem of suffering to a greater degree?
I think one needs to be careful here. Yes, in the long run, I think the only way to solve the problem of suffering is going to tackle our sinister genetic source code. But
Right.
in practice, we're going to need a twin track approach. Anything from the evils of racism, of systematic economic injustice, of prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's just, even if we get everything right on the environmental front, and I'm a great believer in basic income,
Mm-hmm.
universal access to healthcare, guaranteed accommodation. But even if we do everything right on the front of social justice, environmental reform, I mean, the nature of the hedonic treadmill is that a lot of people are still going to be dissatisfied a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Nature did not design us to be happy. So,
Exactly.
yeah, if we want a happy biosphere, we're actually going to have to, yeah, reprogram ourselves, edit our genetic source code.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, it's easy, particularly if one is, on an interview or something like that, to sound like a crude genetic determinist saying it's all genes, genes, genes. In practice, yeah, I mean, it's obviously there are all sorts of things we should be doing to try to make a fairer world, a better world in terms of political, social, economic reform. kind of personal relationships, you name it. But yeah, it's a twin track approach, really.
Super intelligence. Now this is tricky because when you have things like eugenics and stuff like that, tinkering with our intelligence, people have all types of issues along the line when it comes to super intelligence. I remember back in the day when I was a kid, I seen the Lawnmower Man. You remember that movie from the 80s? It's an old movie called The Lawnmower Man. I said, wow, they just hooked him up to to like the computer. He got smart. He just got super smart. And ever since I watched that movie 1,000 times, and I just was like, wow, if we can just be able to increase our intelligence scientifically somehow, that would be so dope. But there's a debate that is intelligence genetic? Like, is some people just born smarter than others? As far as I heard a lot of debates along this line. Like, intelligence is innate, but side note, let me just how would we increase our intelligence, more enhance our intelligence more than the average intelligence of today, like beyond Einstein and any of our smartest people on the planet today? How would we be able to do that technologically?
I mean, well, one possible option, I'm not sure it's sociologically realistic, if one really wanted to create super Einsteins in a hurry, would be to have human cloning together with a little bit of genetic tweaking, and
we'll have to
essentially have a colony of several hundred Einsteins with different genetic variations, hothouse the products in some kind of recursive cycle of improvement. Now, that would be one route to superintelligence. However, I think one's got to ask a question: what is intelligence? And currently, it's unfortunately very poorly defined.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
A lot of people mistakenly identify intelligence with what's measured by so-called IQ tests, which are really essentially junk science. So they've seduced an awful lot of people. I mean, IQ tests very crudely measure what's been called the autistic component of general intelligence. Essentially they're mind blind. They don't measure social cognition, cooperative problem solving skills, practicality, a whole host of extremely intellectually demanding skills like that. And there is a risk that if prospective parents want to boost intelligence, rather than creating full spectrum superintelligence, we're going to create a very narrow kind of autistic intelligence, which is not, this is it. People very high on the autism Asperger's spectrum, can be really good at mathematics and physics. Fine, great. But in many cases, they struggle with social cognition, other aspects of intelligence too.
Right.
So, I'm much more cautious than some people about genetically amplifying intelligence, because we don't, unless we're going to go down the cloning route, we don't really know how to do it yet. It's going to be possible, something like Neuralink. Neuralink is kind of prefiguring how it's going to be possible to have essentially narrow superintelligence on a neurochip. So imagine if you have a neurochip, you can outplay Kasparov, you're a mathematical prodigy, you can do countless stuff because you have it's a net-enabled chip implanted. But, and this is what I'm going to say now is controversial, I don't think classical digital computers are sentient, or they're not going to become conscious or wake up. They're very good at what they do. But, unlike humans or pigs or dogs, they are not phenomenally bound subjects of experience. So when one talks of post-human superintelligence, some people may be imagining our machines, but I think post-human superintelligence is going to be us, or rather our genetically rewritten and AI augmented descendants. And you could say, yeah, kind of cyborgs in a sense, but
Right.
cyborgs conjures up a whole set of images from sci-fi that may not
Right.
be appropriate.
Wow. Yeah. Let me see. What about super longevity? What do you think? Uh, how long do you think it will take for our best scientists to figure out how we can get at least to 120 years old on average as an average lifespan? At least.
120, probably later this century. Currently, essentially only one person in history,
Right.
and she's probably, unfortunately, a fraud. No one has been provably shown to have reached their 120th birthday. 119 years, 97 days is the highest that all that's Sarah Knaus, that all scholars accept as. I'm discounting the John Calment case.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
how are we going
really?
to get? Sorry.
Oh, I didn't even know that. I thought Jean. I
Oh
always
well,
thought the French lady Jean Clermont was the.
yeah,
Wow.
I
I'm just
did
getting
too,
schooled right now.
but thanks to some very savvy detective work by a Russian investigator, it now
Wow.
seems likely that she usurped her mother's identity as a way for her family to avoid taxes. And then at the alleged age of 90 something, she concluded this deal with a lawyer who was expecting. The lawyer was expecting she was going to die in a couple of years, and she milked this credulous lawyer for 30 years
Oh.
with this Viager deal. I mean, I couldn't. I used to be. I was fascinated because I'd read it when she was asked this French woman Jean Arles at the Jean Calment, when the city of Arles asked her to send her kind of photos and records so that the city would be able to celebrate her. She allegedly instructed her closest relative and heir to burn the documents and photos concerned. So yeah, she was a
Wow.
shrewd old biddy.
She do everybody. Oh
I mean,
gosh.
so I'm saying
I
this
thought
with
I
a
have her books.
smile,
I
but
have
I
a
find it
biography.
difficult to be very, very indignant about it because let's face it, I think a lot of people, if they could avoid taxes, might be tempted to, shall we say, cheat the tax man. And yeah, I think one should be honest with lawyers. But if she got a rather better deal from that lawyer than he thought he was getting, a quote from Jean Calment: "In life, one sometimes makes bad deals." And this
Whoa.
is this lawyer who paid her essentially for 30 years, thinking that he was going to get her flat when she died, but she outlived him.
That's. Thanks for clearing that up. Well, hip hop was out there. Jean Claremont. I used to think she was the longest, oldest person that ever lived, but Mr. Dave Pearce just corrected me on that, and I'm glad that he
I didn't do the research here.
fine. But I believe you. I believe that though. I believe that.
Possibly I'm too cynical.
No.
Possibly I'm too cynical. But yes, Nikolai Zak was the Russian researcher who dug up some of the highly suggestive evidence. I mean, Russians tend to be more suspicious because, after all, if a Russian claimant to being the oldest person, if the relatives burnt the relevant documents, we'd think, hey, it's obviously a fraud. But no, France, it's different. But no, if you go to Wikipedia, Jean Calment, she's still down as the oldest, but Wikipedia notes there is a controversy.
Right.
And in fairness, I mean, I've got to say, unless we actually do the genome sequencing, we won't know for sure that she usurped her mother's identity. But
wow. Okay. Well, hey, it happens. A lot of people. I remember back in the day, the Kunza culture. They were saying that they were the oldest people, but they were just doing it for tourism. It's really you have to be really careful because people were coming out the woodwork like, "We are the oldest people, the only people." What about the Okinawans? Are they?
The Okinawans genuinely do seem to, be extremely long lived. But yeah, there is the whole topic of extreme longevity. The whole field is rife with exaggeration, outright fraud. I mean, if I could persuade you I was 120, what a fantastic advertisement for veganism I would be. Right. I mean, it's there reaches a stage in life, sadly, human life, when the only thing one can be distinguished for probably is one extreme longevity. And in an era before proper record keeping, there was, exaggeration was endemic. But even with record keeping, essentially, there is still often a great incentive to fraud and exaggeration. Yeah.
Wow. So, do you think nanotechnology would do it for super longevity? Because I hear, what's the gentleman's name? Drexler. I mean, I read the Engines of Creation. I have everybody's books. You have, what's the other gentleman's name that Ray Kurzweil always talk about? Oh, man, I don't know why my brain's going blank. He wrote the first books on nanotechnology applied to medicine. What's the brother's name? Anyway, but he talks about redesigning our organs using nanotechnology and getting rid of organs. Ray Kurzweil has his own ideas about that. But let me hold that thought for a second. Are you considered a materialist, a diehard materialist? Because most transhuman, I know a lot of trans. The thing that makes it different with you, you don't seem to be. You seem to be a little different in that matter.
I think here we go into some really speculative stuff, and any of your listeners who aren't philosophically minded may want to switch off. But I believe that the world is described exhaustively by the equations of physics, which, materialists would say something similar. But where I differ is, what is the intrinsic nature of the physical? The fire in the equations, because materialism suffers from a monumental problem, the so-called hard problem of consciousness.
Right.
If physicists and chemists are correct about the nature of atoms and molecules, you ought to be a zombie. We ought to be having this conversation, and it wouldn't even be dark inside. We ought to be, insentient organic robots. And yet, of course, we are conscious, and we can talk about our consciousness. And our consciousness is bound into perceptual objects, apprehended by a unitary self. And somehow, materialism has, got to solve the hard problem of consciousness. And I think a lot of people think, well, either you've got to be a materialist, or you, surrender to superstition, religio mystical,
it's very black and white.
But there's another perspective, the so-called intrinsic nature argument, that says, well, we do actually know the intrinsic nature of the physical, the fire in the equations, and that is consciousness. And what makes our minds, biological minds, special is the way that our consciousness is bound into unitary subjects of experience. That when you're awake or dreaming, you're not a so-called micro-experiential zombie. I stress this is a controversial view, but basically there is no such thing as orthodoxy on the hard problem of consciousness. People are all over the place.
Yeah.
All the options are intuitively crazy. So I think the question to ask, if someone's got a weird theory of consciousness, don't think just that's crazy. Think how can you test it?
Right.
But
It has to be
anyone who is,
testable.
any of your listeners who are thinking, God, this guy is crazy, this is not part of the transhumanist package. This is speculative. And then in other ways, I'm pretty orthodox. As I said, I believe in the methods of science, scientific methodology. Transhumanists, yeah, we're rationalists. And any explanation of consciousness, I think, has to be consistent with the mathematical formalism of physics.
Well, I mean, I don't think we got too far with solving that problem of consciousness. I don't think we, I don't think we even close to solving that hard problem. Y'all don't know where we at with that. I've been looking though. Trust me. I've been like, because I know that ultimately, if we solve the problem of consciousness, then a lot of things will open up. That's a really big problem. And I know the yogis, when I was into yoga really hard and Buddhism real hard, they said that the consciousness does not exist in the biological brain. That's what the ancient yogis used to say back in the day. I read a lot of books on that, but I don't. That's kind of hard for me to believe. And but it's just where when is this problem ever going to be solved? I mean, I listen to Ray Kurzweil. He talks about all these scanning techniques to scan the brain and all these techniques. When will we ever solve? Who's actually really committed to trying to solve this problem? Where's the group of scientists committed to solving the problem of consciousness? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, and essentially there are a whole bunch of problems.
Right.
In the case of, imagine this, just for the benefit of people who aren't familiar, there is one school of transhumanism that thinks it's going to be possible to scan your brain, to digitize it,
right,
and to upload it into a digital computer. As I said, I'm personally skeptical about this. Imagine if you were to replace the ones and zeros of a classical digital computer with discrete little pixels of experience. You could run the code, and however complicated the code and however fast you executed the program, all you've got is a micro-experiential zombie. One needs an explanation of how consciousness is phenomenally bound into multiple perceptual objects apprehended by a unitary self. This is the so-called binding or combination problem. And unless it can be solved, then even if you think consciousness is fundamental to the world, then digital computers are not going to wake up.
Because I think that what the yogis were trying to say back in the day is that consciousness is not consciousness is everywhere, and it's not in a fixed place in the brain. That's what I got from it, at least. Like they were trying to explain that it's not in a fixed place, that it doesn't just exist. It's not produced by the brain. It's not just a material thing, and it exists everywhere. That's what I used to read about it. It seemed, when you don't know too much about the scientific method, this idea seems really, you're like,
Well, when you're dreamlessly asleep, even if your basic constituents have got rudimentary consciousness, nonetheless, you're not a subject to experience. You don't suffer when you're dreamlessly asleep. Likewise, you're the kind of brain in the gut, your enteric nervous system. 500 million neurons, a fabulously complicated information processing system, and yet it's not, to the best of our knowledge, a subject to experience. So even if consciousness is widespread or ubiquitous, even if fields of consciousness are fundamental, one hasn't really cracked the hard problem. One needs to show how it is bound into subjects of experience like you and me.
No, I agree. Let me see. I got some more questions actually. Oh, okay. Well, since we're on the topic of consciousness, do you think consciousness survive after death? I know most transhumanists don't.
Uh, Candidly, no,
Me
I
too.
don't.
No, I don't either. I mean, that's out of the door. That's a transhumanist. I don't believe in that. That's hard to believe. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, even if your fundamental constituents, the underlying fields, rudimentary consciousness, nonetheless, transhumanists. I've got to be careful here. There are some Christian transhumanists,
Oh yeah,
but
big up to
yeah,
those brothers too and the sisters. Big up to them. Yeah, that's true. I keep forgetting that. We have Mormon transhumanists
personally,
too. That's so dope. I like it though. I think it's dope.
Here I'm quite orthodox, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Uh. Yeah, I keep forgetting that. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Oh, are you signed up for Chronics?
I took the first steps,
Yeah, I'm not
but what
signed up
I'm
either.
probably going to do is to be cryothanized. Because if you sign up for cryonics, yes, wait until you're 95, probably pretty gaga, and then suspended after you're technically dead in suboptimal conditions. Whereas personally, essentially, I would anticipate being suspended when I'm still fairly compos mentis. Cryothanasia. I mean, what age will I go for it? I don't know. There are all kinds of legal, technical issues here. Personally, I have my doubts whether advanced intelligence will consider it ethical to recreate primitive, dysfunctional, brain damaged Darwinian organisms like me. But yeah, I think one has a duty if one's a transhumanist to set an example. And I think cryonics should be opt out and cryothanasia should be opt in. And one of my reasons for thinking this, one of my reasons for thinking this is that it can potentially defang death. Imagine if, instead of grieving for your father or your grandfather, you went to visit your dad or your granddad in the cryonics tank. Now, I don't doubt that if you are suspended in optimal conditions, it would be possible for an advanced civilization to reanimate you. How faithful should be the restoration? Because they'll be able to cure whatever killed you, but how much of an upgrade should you have in terms of intellectual capability, mood enrichment, and so forth before one ceases in any meaningful sense to be you? I mean, does it matter? I mean, most people have, implicitly, our conceptual scheme has this notion of an enduring metaphysical ego. Right. One is born, lives for 80 years or so, and then dies. But, of course, in practice, there's a constant turnover of your physical constituents. When one wakes up in the morning, one isn't literally the same person who went to sleep the night before. Right. I'm not sure how much this really matters because, if you are suspended and you wake up, let's say in the year 2150 and so on, you will feel this is me. I mean, okay, maybe if you're, the kind of person, when you wake up in the morning, are you sort of agonizing? Am I really the same person who fell asleep last night? I'm guessing you're not. But likewise, if your namesake wakes up in the year 2100 or 200, feels extremely good. Wow, talks to I mean, this is it. Okay, this is speculative. We don't know it's going to happen, but I think it's really important for transhumanists to offer something for everyone because it can be rather cruel telling older people, yep, science is going to find a cure for aging soon after you're dead, kind of thing. Whereas if we have an approach of combining, the Zen strategy of trying to defeat the biology of aging with opt-out cryonics, opt-in cryothanasia, one can be offering something for an aging population as well as the young.
Oh, well, there would be some legal, there have to be some legal parameters around that, because they, right?
Oh, indeed, yes.
Yeah,
I'm skirting over a lot of moral dilemmas.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, I think you answered a lot of my stuff.
You must forgive the product placement for Red Bull, but sugar-free
it's all
Red
good.
Bull.
It's all good.
They're not paying me to do this.
Well, I think you answered a lot of my questions, and I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I hope, I'm sure my audience is going to enjoy some of the stuff that you said. I think the Abolitionist Project is the hedonistic imperative is very important, and I think all the hip hoppers that are interested in exploring other ideas of thought definitely needs to investigate the Abolitionist Project. Read through it. It's online. Where can they find this information where they can thumb through the Abolitionist Project and learn more about it?
My original website, and I'm afraid the style is very dated and it's written in clotted academic prose. Okay. My original website is hedweb.com, HEDWEB.com. But essentially anyone who is interested, skim brutally. If anyone has follow-up, critical feedback, stuff they would like answered, I'm very happy to do so to the best of my fallible ability. Perhaps we can have another session sometime.
We definitely will.
Lockdown. Sorry if I've glossed over some of the very challenging issues.
No, I like to, because this is an entry level to what we're talking about, and my whole thing is I want to get people who don't know about transhumanism into transhumanism, not people who already are into transhumanism. I want to try to get other people into it that don't know anything about it. I want to expose them to the ideas, and that's what Super Longevity Institute show is trying to do. Get people who are not exposed to transhumanism interested in some of these ideas and exploring different ideas other than the religious, the purely religious worldview. Transhumanism to me is an alternative to that. It doesn't necessarily have to replace it either. So that's that's why I'm so happy to have you on, because as a person who has a background in Buddhism, I was like, getting rid of all suffering. This guy's great. I was like, what the hell? I said, man, this is right up my alley. I was so happy to see somebody that comes from the same background. I mean, I was a vegan for years, and I'm about to get back into vegans. I was a vegan for like 5 or 10 years, but now that I have more knowledge on nutrition, I think that I can get back. I'm gonna get back into it, but be more disciplined in it, because I definitely want to. I don't want to add to the suffering in the world. I want to help reduce it. But David Pearce, thank you, man. I really appreciate you coming to the show. It means a lot. Anything you want to say in the closing out to my audience?
No, other than just to express my appreciation for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for some very sharp, astute questions. Thank you just for making me feel relaxed. And seriously, best of luck and your projects too. And I look forward to watching and hearing future episodes of your show too.
Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. Single wide salute, one love. David Pearce, ladies and gentlemen. We're definitely going to have him back on the show. This is the Super Longevity Institute. This episode is called The Abolitionist Project. Thank you, David Pearce. I'm out.
Thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Over and out. Bye-bye.
Bye.